So my first discussion question is, what do you think is the most effective way to communicate to film audiences? And what do you think is the most effective way to communicate to live audiences? And then what do you think is the most effective way for real life relationships? Um, and just looking over the 16 right now, there's human presence, words, sound, silence, light, movement, costume, color, symbols, props, music, songs, activity, relationships, images, and gesture. And I definitely think for film audiences, it's images, because the camera leads you to what you want to see, I guess you could say. In live theater, it's definitely more interpretational. You can look at many different things, but for film, the camera is on one thing. Maybe some things in the background, but it's usually focused in on one certain thing, at least from what I've seen. I think in theater with live audiences, it really does make an impact if you use silence. And we tried to use that in the film as well. I tried to make it very quiet to prove a point. Um, I tried to make it the way that I interpreted it. The scenes was in the eyes of Sarah. I wanted people to see in the eyes of Sarah. I wanted people to feel like the awkward, quiet, but her normal quiet. I wanted people to understand. So I tried to help with while using visual cues, audio cues. I just tried to shoot it differently as well with the angles and the different scenes and the way that it was more of a shaky cam in your face instead of a performance. I tried to make it very realistic because that's what Children of a Lesser God did so well. It was so highly praised because it was just so realistic and so nonchalant and not a big deal. It was just really representing the deaf community as they would be in reality. So I tried to make it as realistic as possible. It was more of a modern setting. It was just, her and her husband, my boyfriend, so it was just, he would come home from an argument or something, and it'd just be right there, and it'd be in your face, and it would be just a moment in life, really. So we tried to make it as realistic as possible. We tried to make it as casual as possible, the dialogue as casual as possible. So back to the question, what is the most effective way for relationships to communicate? I definitely think that in a relationship you do need words. You need communication, but communication isn't always with words. But I think words matter when you're in relationships because I think people really hold on to the words, and people really focus on the words a little bit more than the meaning of the words. They focus on the actual words. Gestures, I think, is a big one. I think the little things in life mean the most. So if you're in a relationship, I think, I'm a hugger, so I think that definitely plays a part in that as well. My second discussion question is similar to Smoke Signals and Boys Don't Cry. Why haven't we seen more movies like Children of a Lesser God? And just a note, Marlene Matlin, who was a deaf performer in the movie Children of a Lesser God, is the only deaf performer actress to have won the Academy Award. And I think it definitely has to stem down with representation, especially what we talked in class. Especially, it was it's very hard to identify the exact problem, and there really aren't that many answers out there. But I definitely think that it is hard because the deaf community is a community. In my experience with ASL, I took at UNR, they really, really stick to each other, and they really not keep to themselves, but they really appreciate that they have one another because they understand what they're going through. I can't even imagine how hard it is to be a deaf person living in a hearing world, and I can't imagine how alone it must feel, just like Sarah. I can't imagine how lonely it could feel. So I definitely think that the representation has to come out a lot more But with that, I think we need to include deaf culture in our normal society. I think we need to stop saying that being deaf isn't normal, because it totally is. Some people are born deaf, some people become deaf, but it's definitely normalizing the fact, that deaf people live the same lives that hearing people do. We actually had a project in one of our ASL classes that I took, which was Be Deaf for a Day. Imagine you don't have hearing and just try and operate as a deaf person would. And literally the only thing deaf people can't do that hearing people can do is hear. That's the only difference between them. One can hear and one cannot. They're the same as everyone else. So I think we definitely, as a society, we definitely need to attack that stereotype and break it down, because they can do the same thing that we can do. They just can't hear. And that's it. They're perfectly capable of everything else. But I wanted to mention as well, there has been a big deaf presence, a deaf movement, I would say, actually, in theater. There was a revival of Spring Awakening, but it was with hard of hearing performers and deaf performers. So there would be a speaking performer, and then there would be a performer signing, either in ASL or in SEE, and it was a beautifully well done. It was so incredible. I've seen some clips of it online, and Marlene Matlin also helped that happen. So I think the people who really are working and who really are making a difference are not getting the representation they deserve. So I think there is a little bit more of a representation happening. There is a movement happening in the deaf community. It's just that not a lot of people know about it, because not a lot of people understand the deaf community, I guess you would say. They don't get a lot of attention, but they are making huge changes, and I think we will see those changes in the future. My third and last discussion question is, would the performance be as moving and as authentic if a hearing person played the role of Sarah? This is a question that I've debated a lot, because I really do love the role of Sarah. It was really, really interesting stepping into that role. And I stepped into it as an actor would, because I am an actor, I am an actress, so it wasn't just like a 4-minute video for me. It was a really interesting experience. My gestures, my mannerisms, everything, I was operating in a completely different way. I would find myself opening my mouth and getting so mad about to say something and holding back. Deaf people don't do that. Deaf people don't need to open their mouths unless they're generally shocked. They're not going to speak and hold something back. So it was definitely interesting thinking about how Sarah would operate just in a normal day. We tried to make it very realistic, and we tried to make it a normal fight. Less dramatic than what I have seen in the past, just because we wanted to give it a little more of an easy viewing for someone who doesn't know what Children of a Lesser God is, or someone who doesn't really understand the story. So we tried to make it as realistic as possible, so I tried to step into her mind, and it was very challenging. I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I get everything. Okay, especially, is the role as moving and as authentic? I don't think it will be as authentic, obviously. There's something about being a deaf person that a hearing person will never understand. And there are experiences that they don't understand, and concepts that they don't grasp. Would it be inauthentic if a hearing person portrayed Sarah? I don't think so. I just think it would be a completely different story and a completely different portrayal, and different intentions altogether. I do believe that it would be a cool thing. I'm not saying that because I have a personal bias, because I really like Sarah. I would never accept the role of Sarah, because I am not a hard of hearing or deaf person, because the author, and my script is somewhere, the author, I cannot remember his name for the life of me right now, he put into the play that he only wanted hard of hearing or deaf people to play the role of Sarah, to keep it authentic, and to really have that for the deaf community, for deaf actresses and actors. That is their role, you know. It is meant for them. It is written for them. It was written for a deaf actress. So I would never accept the role, although I do think it would be interesting to see it done. I do think that it would bring a very different feel to it and a completely different story entirely. However, I do think it would be a good thing. I'm just looking at my notes. I do think it would be a good thing because it would encourage transculturalism. Really stepping into the other. Stepping into a situation that I will never understand. Might understand if I become deaf, but I have not understood it yet. So I don't understand what it's like being deaf. So I really did have to see in the other's eyes, the other not being myself. And it really made me happy, and I really liked the exercise, and it really helped me understand some things, you know, and reminded me of how, you know, oh, I don't even appreciate this, or oh, I didn't even think about this. So it really did help me understand more about their culture. And I think it helps cross bridges as well. Will it be as moving? Will the performance be as moving if a hearing person played the role of Sarah? I think it has the potential to be, but like I said, it probably has a different feel. Whether a movie or a live version or whatever, it probably won't have that authentic rawness to it. The raw emotions that a deaf person could bring to the role, but it definitely has the potential to still have an impact and to still move and to still be a piece of art. Just not the same piece of art it was meant to be originally. So, yes, those are my discussion questions.